When you first start 3D printing, it can be very tempting to just get in your CAD program and start dragging things around and creating whatever you want to. But before you do that, it's very important that you think about size. Think about what size the object you're designing needs to be. So if you don't, you may be trying to design this, and you wind up with this, or even this instead. So it's really important to consider size of something before you begin designing. So how then do we decide exactly how big something should be? So some people in the world can just look at an object and guess, oh, that should be about 50 millimeters. But for most people, including myself, the easiest way is to just get a ruler and think, okay, if I want my object to be about that long, then I can put my fingers on the ruler and say, oh, that's about 90 millimeters. So if, for example, I wanted to make a name tag and I had it in my mind I want it to be about this big, I could just take my fingers, put that next to my ruler, and say, oh, that is about 75 millimeters long, and then when I'm designing, I would know I want to make it 75 millimeters long and 35 millimeters wide. Now, notice when you pick up a ruler here in the United States, at least, there are two sides. One of them is marked in centimeters, and one of them is marked in inches. Now, in 3D printing, we almost always use millimeters. So notice that side that is marked centimeters. Each number represents a centimeter, and each tick mark on that ruler side represents a millimeter. The reason we use millimeters is because it allows us to be a lot more precise without having to use a lot of fractions. So I can say I want something to be 4 millimeters instead of 3/16 of an inch. So keep in mind, in 3D printing, we almost always use millimeters. Now, there are other times when I need something that's a very precise measurement. And for those times, there's a tool called calipers, which is even more precise than a ruler. It allows me to get very exact, down to the fraction of a millimeter. So for example, if I were creating a screw for some part and I needed to know exactly what size that had to be in order to fit in, I could use the calipers to measure the hole or to measure the screw and figure out what size I need to make the hole. Or for example, if I were making a fidget spinner and I have a ball bearing and I need that to go in the center of that fidget spinner, okay, I would then be able to measure that ball bearing and then see what size I need to design the hole in the middle of my fidget spinner so that the bearing would be able to fit. Now, it is 3D printing, so when I get ready to 3D design something, I do need to think about all three dimensions. I need to think about the length and the width and the height. Now, we usually refer to these three dimensions with certain letters. So the side-to-side motion here is the X direction. The back and forth direction is Y axis, and up and down is the Z axis. So when you get ready to print, there are some certain things that you want to keep in mind regarding size. The first one is the size of your printer. So the typical printer that most people have in their homes, for example, can print about 200 millimeters in all directions. Now, this will vary a little bit from printer to printer. This Bamboo A1, for example, can print 256 millimeters in all directions. And this Bamboo A1 Mini can print 180 millimeters in all three directions. So when you get ready to 3D print something, you want to make sure that whatever your design is will fit on your printer plate. Otherwise, you're going to have to figure out how to break it up into pieces so that you can print it piece by piece and somehow reassemble it. So a lot of people only think about not making something too large when they're designing, but it's also possible to make something too small. So your printer nozzle is 0.4 millimeters, which sounds really, really small. But if you start designing things that are very intricate, like fine writing, fine text, it's too small for your printer to be able to print, and it won't show up when it goes to print, or it won't show up well. So it's really important that you also think about not making something too small. So you've got to make sure that it's large enough that the nozzle can print it, but small enough that it fits on the plate. So another reason you want to think about the size of the object you're printing is to be aware of how much filament it's going to use. So every 3D print is going to use a certain amount of filament. Large objects are going to use lots of filament, small objects are going to use a little filament. So if you print something very large, it can use a lot of filament, which can get very costly very quickly. So if you're printing something that you really want, that's really valuable to you, then you may think, okay, it's worth that investment. But you don't want to print something out that's just really big just to see if it can do it, if you're just going to throw it away and you're going to have to waste $20 worth of filament. So you want to be sure that you think about what it is that you're printing and how valuable it is versus how much filament it takes. And your slicing program will actually tell you how much filament your project will use before you go to print it. So that way you can see how much filament is this going to use? Do I have enough? Is it worth it to me? So I can slice it and see in there, this Statue of Liberty that we're printing here would use 13.83 grams of filament. And I can see here an approximate cost of that. Now obviously the cost is going to vary depending on how much I paid for my filament spool, but it'll give me at least a good approximation of what something like that might cost. And another thing you want to think about when you're starting to print large objects is how much time it's going to take. Obviously, large prints take a lot more time because your printer is printing layer by layer by layer. Large objects are lots of layers, and so it can take a really long time to print something that's especially large. So if you slice it and it tells you this is going to be a 56-hour print, you might want to stop and think, is that worth it before you press the print button? Okay, so just a quick recap. Be sure when you're designing something that you think about what size you want something to be. So use a ruler, use calipers, make sure you get those dimensions accurate. When you're designing, make sure that you enter the dimensions accurately so that it will turn out the way that you want it to, so that whatever you're designing will be able to fit together the way it's supposed to. Second, be sure and think about the capabilities of your printer when you're designing. Don't make it too big, don't make it too small. Third, make sure you think about how much filament it's going to use. Don't waste filament on something that you really don't want. And fourth, be sure and think about how much time it's going to take. You can check all of these settings in your slicing program, so be sure to check them before you hit print.